Hey everyone, so today we're going to review the Figma Design Essentials Udemy course that I took. This course I bought, I think for like $13-14. I wanted to get familiar with Figma, and now I'm going to sort of review it, but also solidify the learnings that I had. So just walk through what I learned in the course uh, from an overview, and and so that I'm ready to move on to the next. And then this might also be helpful for those that are, I guess, younger than me and don't, or even older than me and don't really know um, what's out there. This might be like an interesting perspective, I guess. We don't all have to do drop shipping. We don't all have to do what is it, SMMA. Um, we can be diverse and we can be interesting. So let's review something interesting, something new. Hopefully it's new to a lot of you. So if you're not familiar with Figma, it's essentially what user interface, just let me fix this a little. What user interface, user experience designers use to develop apps and websites. Or not develop, but design. They're the first people where you have an idea already and you essentially want to validate it. And before even spending all that time coding it, you just want to run it through a customer or a user and see, is it useful? Does the feel of it match the company's culture and vision? So there's lots of things that they need to design for, and you don't really want to design while you're coding, because if you one little adjustment could take months, thousands of dollars of readjusting, I guess. And so here's, for example, an example. It's almost like PowerPoint if you really don't know what's going on, where you can just add in different shapes and then make it look like a screenshot from your phone would look. So here we can see this is what's known as a frame. This frame contains a bunch of images, shapes, text, and what else? Colors to make it look like a screenshot. And so here we can see, I think this is the top. You can move it. There's a bunch of different things. So this is like it looks like a screenshot from your messages. You can see each of these is customizable. You can adjust it, and so when you put a lot of these frames together, Figma also has functionality where you can interact with it. So I can open up my phone and start clicking around, and for example, clicking on this message would take me to this screenshot. So it's just a bunch of screenshots, a bunch of images, and it feels like an app, but it's not a coded application. It's just to give you the feel and to make sure you're going in the right direction with clients, with users. And I'm learning this essentially so that I can first come up with a few app ideas and then run it through the different customers, test it myself a few weeks, and then put it out there and see the reception and then adjust from there. But yeah, I feel like a lot of people aren't really very good designers. So even in this, the user interface, how we're interacting with it, how we're going from screen to screen, that in itself is like an art and a science, and I need to learn that. So anyways, took this course, and what do I have open? Yeah, and this was, let's put on some music. And this course mostly focuses on learning Figma, even though it says UI design essentials. I would say it's more so teaching you Figma, and so much to the point is it focused on Figma and not necessarily these other concepts that I feel like there's probably YouTube courses out there that could have taught me the same thing. But I mean, it was only $13, so it wasn't that bad of a mistake, that bad of a purchase. So right now let's just go through the notes that I have. It's gonna be a bit of a long video, but I'll try to just skip over all these. It's about 11 hours, 12 hours. 110 lectures covering all of these different aspects, but it's really essential, or not essential. It's very simple, and again, it could have been covered probably with a YouTube video. So the class started with, we have like a, I guess, a persona and the company name, and then a task flow that we want to make. So for this particular task flow, it's just what set of screens on a, what set of screens, frames, I guess, from earlier, am I going to make throughout this course. And so right now we were focusing on the home page, looking at the particular product that we're making. So what features does that product have? Then making like a checkout screen, and then once you click purchase, getting the confirmation page. And even though we had this, even though we had this task flow and we followed along with it through assignments, it wasn't, I didn't really feel like we got into the principles of UI UX design. We sort of start to get a feel, like dip our toes in, but we didn't really talk about principles or anything like that I feel like I'm, I guess, satisfied with it. And yeah, so now let's start going, or I guess, so I guess I can show what exactly we built over the course, and then we can go over the notes. So task flow and persona, this is a page. Pages typically have like different frames. You can organize your pages differently. So style guide, this can help other designers or engineers see what what font pairs you have in your Figma thing, and then what colors you're working with. Mood board, this is kind of to check with your client if I guess the vision you have for the pages that you're going to make, for the task flow, for the colors, the palettes, text, all of that stuff. Does these images sort of embody that? And being an engineer, I'm not used to, I guess, just seeing images and being like, yeah, I understand what you're, I mean, it just says like, I feel what you feel, but that feels so vague. So I don't know. We just did a mood board. And what else? Components. This is where you can, when you have an app, you typically have like you want to keep consistent buttons, consistent logos. Let's see, like labels. So there's a bunch of different things that you want to keep consistent throughout your app, and this is where you make like the main version, and then you can just click and drag into your application. And and then the last 4 pages are for the low fidelity prototype. These are essentially wireframes, and then these are the high fidelity pages. Low fidelity, we're looking at wireframes. So instead of just adding images, trying to pick out the colors, trying to pick out the fonts, we just want to focus on, this is essentially how the app is going to be organized. This is going to be the home page. We're going to have an image, we're going to have a text field, and then we're going to have 2 buttons. And this is product details, checkout, confirmation. So it's just like almost like an outline if you were to think about paper. We didn't do desktop, we just did the mobile. And then for mobile, we're taking those wireframes and then adding a bunch of information, or adding a bunch of details. And so this is where like the style guide comes in. We're going to be using these fonts, we're going to be using this color palette, and we're going to fill this out, flesh it out. So here you can see we didn't quite actually follow the this is actually like an issue I guess I had with the course. Like, he talked about a lot of concepts, we didn't really quite stick to it, but we sticked with it enough to learn the details of how to use Figma as a beginner. But again, it wasn't enough where I feel like I would add this to a portfolio. This is like just to learn Figma. So yeah, homepage, you can see these two buttons. Let's go to prototyping. These two buttons, if I were to click them on in the demonstration or in the demo, it would actually take me to the respective pages. So buy now would take me to the checkout page. Learn more would take me to the product details. I'm not sure. I don't think we connected product review. And you can see I didn't even add the nav. And what else? Some of these buttons I started to connect, but for the sake of learning, I didn't just want to waste my time and connect everything full. And then the checkout page had a little pop-up with this, which is kind of cool, I guess. And then purchase, the confirmation page that we actually ended up doing was like a set of animations, which was okay. But when you're making an actual app, I don't know if animations, how that translates from Figma. I think it would just be like a GIF, and if it's just gonna be a GIF, why animate it in Figma? So I don't know. Animations, I feel like, were kind of lost on me. What is it? Yeah, and then desktop hi-fi. We just, I guess, I don't know. We're really connected to anything. We just sort of made it and made this sort of pop-up newsletter. And again, it was just really to demonstrate Figma functionality, but it never quite felt like it was tied to anything. And I could have tried to flesh out like this, used this and ran with it and used this as well and filled out this even more, filled this out even more. But again, it feels like, especially with these courses, when they offer a case study that you can do, there's going to be thousands of other students that are going to do it as well. And so what separates your portfolio is probably not going to be a case study you did in the class. You should definitely follow to learn the principles, but it's not something that like I am passionate about enough to run with it. There's lots of other ideas that I would prefer to spend my time on and then actually run through like a few people, get their feedback through interviews, go through really the full UX UI design process, which again, he didn't even talk about in this class. He just sort of said you can ask some people, use their feedback to adjust it. So again, it was like enough to dip your toes in, but not quite to feel like you're on your way to becoming a UX UI designer. It's more like if you're in a different profession, I guess, and you want to sort of get a feel for what they go through. That's kind of how it felt. So that's an overview what the deliverables, I guess, the results of this class, the outputs of this class. Now let's look at what we learned. So this will just be this class outline. So there were 29 sections in this class. I took notes on the majority of them. Some of the sections didn't really have too much to offer. That sounds offensive or snarky. But all right, so let's go over these sections, over my notes. So in the first section, it was just really just getting started. Again, he gave the definitions and kind of like an understanding, but that was really it. For task flow, we were, I guess, guided by that image and this image, and then we had sort of an understanding of what a persona might look like, which was really just this paragraph. I'm not sure if this is standard, typically what questions are addressed. And my current understanding, and I'm sure there's more information to it, more details to it, is just whatever you can to get a feel for a person. And I mean, generally that's good enough, but I'm more of like an engineer where I really want to know the specifics of a definition and be like geeked out on it. So the next section we were talking about wireframing. Here we were getting it like a feel for Figma, and I think we created this, so we were just getting familiar with like rectangles, shapes, frames, pages, text. Let's see, high fidelity, more detail. Yeah, the pages, using pages such as, so here is a frame, and then there are many different frames to choose from, which is basically a blank canvas, if you will, that can look like an iPhone, a tablet, like your desktop computer. So that's essentially a frame. A frame just lets you draw whatever you want on it, and it can also be used within a frame. So you can have sub or nested frames. You can connect, for example, shapes. I can connect this text box and this, I guess, blank image thing into a frame. For what purposes? It depends on what you're trying to do. Typically makes it just easier to work with and interact with. That's wireframing. So it's essentially just everything you see here. We're working with lots of shapes, lines, what else? Rectangles, yeah, text. Starting to feel for how to use the color. No, this is. So that would be in the design tab, where you can just edit a lot of the properties, I guess, of the shapes or objects, elements you're interacting with. Prototyping is more for the demo, which I haven't shown, but I'll get to. Let's see. So yeah, we're talking about text boxes. There's different kinds of text boxes. He personally seemed very happy to talk about the properties of the text boxes and which text boxes allow you to like edit it, and so that it expands, versus text boxes where you add text but the text box just stays the same size. So I was with auto width. For me, it was just a text box, since it's at the end, it's not going to be a mock-up that you can interact with. So for me, that didn't really matter. We're talking about strokes, so the outline, I guess, of the box that you see. Object editing, so if you click it like twice, I think you can edit an object in a way that makes it an irregular shape. Scaling, so when you're adjusting boxes, this is object editing still. So when you're scaling boxes, you can scale them like, let's see, it was this one, or no, that's not a good example. Point being, no, or maybe if I, okay, let's redo that. Oh, wait. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So this is a good example. When you're, a lot of times you want to like adjust boxes. And so if you see I'm expanding this, but the text stays the same. Now if I hit K, expand it, text also scales with it. So that was just like we learned a lot of tips and tricks, I guess. We learned about when to group versus when to frame. For example, this I believe is all in a, actually might not be. Yeah, it's not framed. So for example, I can put this all together into a frame. So when I click it, I can just move everything. Whereas previously, let's see, yeah, previously all the objects are separate. And I think it's just like grouping in PowerPoint. except with frames, you have a lot of other, I guess, functionality that happens. Or was it frame selection? You can then go here and then adjust the properties of this frame that you, let's see, does that work? Yeah, there's some, oh, there we go. So see, I didn't choose like the specific rectangle and tell it to make it a color. I said the general frame. And if we look at the rectangle in here, I guess it edited that specific rectangle. But there's frames and then there's groups. When to choose one, I'm not sure. In general, I aim for frames, so that's something I need to research a little bit more when to use each. Frames can survive without any objects in it. For example, this is a frame, and if I delete everything, it'd still be there. Whereas groups, once you delete all the items in that frame, for example from here, the frame or the group is deleted. Frames can be used to mask things. Can used to constrain objects within it. Frames can be nested. Yeah, so frames just had a lot of functionality that groups did not. And yeah, so I guess maybe that's when you would use it. If you delete all the objects and you don't want anything to stay behind, then you would prefer to group it probably. We also learned that Figma has lots of plugins. For example, here I can do plugins, content reel. This one, instead of having to go online, generate lorem ipsum. For placeholder, I'd just go here, adds a bunch. I would have to adjust the text box, but the text is there. Don't have to go online, don't have to copy paste, it's just there. And there's, yeah, a bunch of other plugins. For example, we could do, no, this was the one I was just on, Unsplash. So if I want to add an image somewhere, just go here. Oops. And I could draw, for example, like a rectangle, and then just have it fit the rectangle, have the image fit the rectangle. Now for pages, as I mentioned, all of these things, oh no, that's not pages. Pages is all of these different things that separate different frames. So I think here I want to learn how typical designers tend to separate their pages. What goes in each page is there, for example, like a cover page. Next one has like persona and all the details. Next one has like the design system or the style guide. And then what else is there? Do these, for example, have every single frame of an app, or are those I guess separated into task flows, which are then separated into pages? So that's something that he didn't cover necessarily. Prototyping, let's see, you can connect different buttons to frames to make the screens interactable. So here, for example, what he means, or what I mean, is here when I just click in empty space, you can see there's some places that are lighting up. So essentially these are buttons and they're connected to different frames. And so this is this itself, that's what's showing up, is a frame. Here you can see it's just a frame. It's not actually like drawn into this. It's its own frame, and then I'm just connecting this button to this frame, and then I can interact with it there. Again, I can see what buttons I made of interactable that I can, and then here, well, this is later on actually, the scrolling. And yeah, and then I can also run this on my phone with the Figma app, which makes interacting with it a lot more like how how interacting with a real app would feel like. So let's see if it loads. And okay, yeah, so it has loaded. So if you can see here, when I click nowhere, we can see the same blue buttons or the blue highlights show up, and then I can just interact with it as I would a normal app. So that's kind of cool. Now for animation, this didn't really do anything for me. What did I animate? Here we can see, for example, if I click this button, that's for a feature actually. So when I click this button, essentially, I just have these different frames, and Figma has this functionality where I can animate where I can, let me rephrase it. Figma has a smart animate functionality that I guess interpolates between different frames. So if I give it this frame, which I did, I just tell it to like assume a animation. So here, essentially what happened is this is animated to approach the box, and then the bottle is just appears, and then from here to here, the bottle is animated to go down and then slightly to counterclockwise, and so on. And then you can adjust how long it takes. You can adjust the easing between how quick it's gonna move over that time frame. So it has that capability, but for me, like, if I'm gonna do an animation, why not just import a GIF? And if I'm gonna import a GIF, then either I make it, which I don't know how to, so I wouldn't make it, or I would just pull one from the internet. So that's animation. And need to have the same name. Yeah. The other functionality is when you make, for example, like this mock-up, high fidelity mock-up, and you want to share it, you can share it with someone. So click the share button, give them the link, they can look at it. If they have an account, they can comment on it. They can like leave a specific, let's see if I can comment actually. So let's say I hate, what do I hate here? Didn't finish. And then I, as a designer, or the team, can see what the different comments are, and then once they're done, mark it as resolved. You finish addressing all the comments. So that was commenting. High fidelity mood board, yeah, so I just showed that. I guess it was like an assignment where you want to get a feel for their culture, the company culture, get a feel for the direction they want to take it, because design can be so broad. Some people might be very like quirky and maybe like gothic or dark, while others prefer it to be like more dark or mature, while others prefer it to be like kid friendly and family friendly. So a mood board, I believe, just helps you get a feel for what they want and make sure that you're on the same page, I guess, feeling wise. And there's a bunch of websites that he shared. For section 9, he showed how columns are very helpful to, let's see, which one was it? Shift G. Columns are very helpful to align text and boxes. I don't know if, yeah, so for example here, I used columns to make these boxes and just make sure that they were even and align them. And columns, he mentioned like 6 columns for apps, 12 columns for web pages. Here you can see the columns. There was some padding I believe. I don't know if it was margin or margin. And he didn't really talk about rows or grids. So that was one aspect that I felt like could have been elaborated on. What is more specifics of industry workflows with in regards to columns, rows, grids. So he didn't talk about that, except just 6 for apps, 12 for websites. And that was it. He then went on to tips and tricks here. Let's see. Where was it? Sure. Yeah, so he showed this, and we went over a lot of other ones that some specific ones that he tends to use. For example, shift 1, shift 2, those are very helpful. And yeah, I don't know, but there's this tool essentially that we can use to see what's available, and then we in general can use this, like it's almost like Obsidian, where you can find which commands are available. And I wrote some down. Section 11 was colors. We were talking about developing our color palette, so starting to work on our style guide. And here's the color palette I ended up going with. This was his. Yeah, so these were like the primary colors. The primary colors and then different tones. The secondary color and its tones, and then an accent color. And then whites and blacks or grays. And then we learned about color styles. So let's see, how did I do this? So color styles is essentially how do I save these sets of colors to reuse instead of having to like reuse these and guess which ones are the same. You can just add it to here, and then you can just click on it whenever you want to change the color of something else. So that was color palettes, choosing colors. Again, it was like a touch and go, or like a whatever you feel. And let's put a little bit of thought into it. Something that looks nice, but like it wasn't too technical, or he didn't really talk about the details. Let's see. Yeah, and then naming convention for that, which is nice to know. Then we did the same thing essentially with text and fonts. So chose like heading and a pair font. For that, we just I think used Google. And then he talked about what's typically used for heading font sizes. Learned about text, I think, styles. So again, going here, looking at this, adding one, and we just did that for all of these different font sizes. I think we covered other things that we can adjust with the font, such as line height, space between paragraphs, letter spacing, and copying properties. For example, I could just copy this and then paste it onto this text, the properties of it, not the actual text. And what else? Outline, stroke, font. Yeah, we can edit the font to not look like this. Like I can adjust it. I don't remember outline, stroke, and no. Oh, here we go. So you can see we could just edit the text to not actually be text anymore. Instead, it's now like a vector. Okay. We learned about UI cards. UI cards is essentially just any component or text container, anything that looks like it could fit on like a baseball card, I guess, that you can reuse in your apps. Again, I feel like I'm being repetitive. Even though I'm covering different things, it's like it's not much, like it's the basics. Okay, so then for drawing, I didn't keep what I drew, but we were learning how to use the pen and pencil, which is just clicking pen and pencil, drawing something. We can round off the edges so it's not sharp. We can show the outline of the different shapes we're working on, just to, I guess, help us see what shapes are there. We can draw squircles, which is essentially just a rectangle with rounded edges, nothing fancy there. We can use Boolean drawing tools, but Figma isn't really if you want to do complicated drawings, Figma isn't it. So although cool, I don't know, I don't think I'd use them. Images, we learned how to just fill a frame with an image, which was actually pretty useful. How to resize it so that it keeps the same ratio. There's some cropping, some masking, that was useful. And then how to tidy up images. So if there's a bunch of disorganized images, just using smart selection, which is essentially, I think, is just or let me do this, and then what was smart selection, or do I need to relearn that? Flip. Huh. Yeah, actually I might need to relearn that. Yeah, I don't remember that part. No, that's component. Auto layout, maybe it was this. And yeah. Oh, yeah, so you need to add auto layout. I think it was select and then space them evenly with a little blue icon. Yeah, so that was for a previous version. But was smart. Yes, I think it was, you need to do auto layout first, and then you can use smart selection to, let's see, how do I, wait, I want to, yeah, so this is for spacing, but then, there's a way to reorder them. No. This is gonna get me. There's a way to reorder them that I don't remember. Oh, okay, you just drag it and it keeps the same spacing. Yeah, I think that was smart selection, but let me just add it to my notes because I need to recap that. You mentioned how, again, Figma isn't the best for drawing and editing images, so you would probably want to use something like Photoshop or Illustrator. I'm trying to get this back to how it was. So Photoshop, he's a big fan of Adobe. I think he's a graphic designer, and so he mentioned Photoshop's very helpful to edit images, and you can add it to your apps, websites. So that was, I guess, his plugging Photoshop. Auto layouts and constraints. So something that was nice about the auto layout, which I just sort of demoed in a terrible manner, is that, let me see if these are auto laid out. Yeah, so these are already auto laid out. And then you can have constraints, which is, if you've ever like, this actually might not be the right audience, but if you've ever made like an app, you can have constraints there with like different elements, I guess. And so this is like the same thing. Or even with web pages, you have like positions, relative or absolute. So here's a way to set constraints and tell like an element or an object where it needs to be. You can have padding, margin, and yeah, works with smart selection, constraints, and then he mentioned shadows. I don't know why we talked about shadows there. I think that was for effects. Or maybe not. But anyways, in effects, I think like the few effects that we talked about, there was blurring, there was the blurring and shadows. And then we briefly talked about neomorphism, which is when buttons look like, do I have it? When buttons look like this, which I guess for designers, this is like their wet dream. Didn't really do anything for me. So moved on from there. Saving history. You don't need to save in Figma. Everything's automatically saved to the cloud. And with history, Figma saves like all the edits, so you can go back to a different, I guess, version, and then you can also, for example, add checkpoints. So once you reach a specific milestone, you should add a version to your history, so you can just revert back if needed. Components and instances. Here we were talking about a component, something that you reuse in the app, and then it can have variants. So for example, this logo is great, but let's say some pages are a little bit darker, you have an image and this is going to be on top, so you need maybe a lighter or a darker version. So you can have variants, and what that means is when you just, in terms of using it with Figma, when you insert a logo somewhere, you can just select a different one, and then you can have 2D. This is a one-dimensional variant. But with buttons, for example, let's say you can have small buttons, large buttons, and buttons of different shapes inside, or different colors. So you can just select which color, which size, and that's just properties, two-dimensional properties. And we talked about how to make that. You can override instances. So here I can just edit this. There we go. Without editing the main version. Yeah. And what else? Yeah, and just convention is to have all these components in one page. Here's variants, which I just actually covered. Making a form, here we're just using what we learned in variants and making the form of the checkout page, which was shift 1, which was here. These all stem from this label. And what else? Prototyping. Here we learned about the overlay, which I demonstrated. So we have a home page, and then we have this frame, which we want to show up when we click this button. So we learned about overlays, where this can overlay on top of this page or this frame without it, I guess, just what I said was sort of a complete sentence. And then we also were introduced to vertical scrolling just by having content that overflows on a frame. And we also learned how to get elements to stay like at the top or at the bottom, even if you're scrolling. And then there's a flow feature, which I won't get into, getting bored of this. So then teams, projects, just again, Figma, how do you work with it? So when you have an account, you can have different, I guess, teams. Within those teams, you can have different projects. Within those projects, you can have different files. And it just depends on how you're using Figma, your occupation, how you would use it. Freelancers would use it different than people that are working for a company. Libraries is how do you then take a component that you use in a project and then just have it be, I guess, universal for a bunch of different projects. So you add it to a library. I didn't actually add any of these to my library. But if you do find icons that you like, you can add it to your library, and then you just go to assets. And these are all local, but if I had libraries, it would show up here, I believe. And then I can just throw in those icons and assets. Animation went more into animations when we actually made the wine bottle, which was here. And I believe I demonstrated it. I don't know why I did it, but didn't really do anything for me. Thumbnail update, how do you change the thumbnail on your Figma? Home. I don't want to, I'll just go home. Here, let's see. Projects. Yeah, so how do you just change this thumbnail? That was a whole section of itself. How do you export these images that you've used in your project? So he just went over, you can export shapes for SVGs, you can export PNGs, JPEGs, PDFs of frames, I think. You can export either by like sizes. So if you use, like, if you're developing an Apple application where you need like times 1, times 2, times 5, you can do that. You can also do it by pixel size. Let's see, re-export. Yeah, and if you ended up exporting something but then you make changes, you can re-export all of those files without having to export it one by one, which is kind of cool. Developer mode was another interesting thing that we learned about. So if we go to developer mode, the developer who is then going to take your high fidelity frames can look at it and then see, here I actually have it for app. So if I were to make like an iPhone application, I can see the properties and actually take it and make like make this button by just copying and pasting. Let's see what else. I think I need to learn a little bit more about developer mode, but here you can see it's telling me what the, is that the font size? Font size is telling me the color. Wait, let me get out of developer mode. No, this is font size. Wait, but then how would fixed with, okay, the text box itself has that width. Yeah, I don't know. I need to learn a little bit more about developer mode. But here you can see how do you get this color. You can save assets too. So if a person's just going through and it's like, I don't want to take a screenshot, I want this actual icon, then they can just download it here. So that was neat. You can share links. I think I mentioned that previously. He briefly discussed design systems. So what we have here for our style guide is just color palettes and the fonts, but you can get a lot more technical and a lot more specific with how you want developers to, or designers to, design around your how do you say, your design principles. So companies like Microsoft or Apple want developers designers to be following their sort of design principles when making plugins or apps for their specific platforms. So yeah, he talked about that. The biggest ones that are out there are Google's Material.io and then Human Interface Guidelines by Apple. And then I have a bunch of questions that I want to go over. So that's an overview of the course. And yeah, I think if I knew there were better or similar courses on YouTube that I could follow, I probably would have done that. But going in, you don't really know what you don't know. So this was like a helpful course, I guess, to get me to the point where I know it wasn't enough. So I am going to take a follow-up advanced course. I'll really want to get a feel for the workflows that a UX UI designer follows in Figma. So what standards are there typically? Like, is this really all there is to fonts? Just these sizes, I mean, the properties? Is there a more technical way? No, actually, this would be color theory. Yeah, so maybe not this, but columns and rows, for example. That's something that I want to know about. I want to learn about, I guess, just anything that would speed up my usage of Figma, because I'm sure there's lots of ideas that'll go through my mind, and I want to be able to have Figma be almost like an extension of my curiosity, of my hands and my mind. And so just be able to lay out prototypes or mock-ups as quick as I can think of them, be able to test them. So anything that can help me get an edge and speed up my productivity, I'm gonna learn about at this phase. Yeah, so that's everything.